Lindsey Graham, a Republican from South Carolina. Senator Graham says on the Senate Armed Services Committee he was in Libya last February. He knew Ambassador Stevens well. And Senator, what a loss really for the entire nation today. Your thoughts on the events over the last 24 hours?
Well, you said it well. America lost one of her best diplomats. Chris loved Libya. He loved his job. He loved his country. He went to the most dangerous places trying to build up democracies and help those who want to help themselves. And Libya lost one of her best friends and allies. I cannot tell you how important Chris was during the war in Libya. And my number one priority is to make sure those who are responsible for the killing of Chris and his colleagues are brought to justice. The Libyan government has said all the right things about condemning this, but we need action to make sure that those who planned and perpetrated this attack are brought to justice.
How do we do that?
Well, work with the Libyans, use our intelligence gathering capabilities and go after them jointly with the Libyans. I'm hoping we will see an outpouring from the Libyan government and the people themselves expressing their admiration for Chris and those who are his colleagues. I think it would reassure America to understand that everybody in Libya is not this way. The extremists in question are trying to break our will. They had a big election in Libya and the Islamic extremists got defeated soundly. So what happened doesn't represent the Libyan people or the movement that Chris gave his life for, and we're not going to disengage because of a bunch of thugs who kill wonderful people.
Senator Graham, we just heard from the president. We also heard from Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Here's what she had to say this morning.
This was an attack by a small and savage group, not the people or government of Libya. The friendship between our countries, born out of shared struggle, will not be another casualty of this attack.
Senator, if we had such a great friendship with the Libyan government, then why did this happen? Why did the government not step in and prevent this from taking place?
Well, at the end of the day, the compound, the outpost in Benghazi was subject to attack. I don't know if this was a mob or a pre-planned attack, but I do know, having been to Libya and listened to Chris many times, followed the election, that what happened doesn't represent the spirit of the Libyan revolution or the people. I know that because I've been there, and I know that Chris understood that, but there are people in our own country that do crazy things, sometimes violent things. This film that everybody's talking about, well, you know, we have a free country, you can almost say and do anything, but that film doesn't represent our government, the spirit of the American people, and it's no excuse to take an innocent life. So at the end of the day, we've got to keep focused on our strategic interest, and that is to make sure that Libya develops into a ally. That under Gaddafi, it was the policy of the government to kill Americans. This is an outrage, but I think Hillary is right. But one thing I would say about the Obama administration, leading from behind is not helpful. We're not nearly engaged in supporting the Arab Spring as we should be. This whole effort in the Mideast to try to develop the Arab Spring has little focus, and I'm very disappointed in our foreign policy.
We'll get a little bit more into that. You mentioned that this is a small group, a small group in Libya, and I want to get to that point. In this film that some have suggested is the inspiration for some of these mob attacks. It didn't just happen in Libya, though. It happened in Egypt as well. There was another very big group that protested outside our embassy and breached our walls there on the anniversary of 9/11. So is this a small, random uprising in Libya, or is this a coordinated attack of some sort and in multiple countries in the Middle East?
It could be a little of both. The extremists who want to drive us out of the region and destroy this effort at democracy are smart. They don't pick random days. I think you may be onto something. I think this may be more coordinated than spontaneous, but at the end of the day, it does not represent the people of Libya or Egypt. In this regard, they didn't go to the square to become an al-Qaeda state, but there are elements in Libya and Egypt and Tunisia and Syria that we must forcefully deal with, and the United States is giving an uncertain signal about our resolve to deal with these groups, and the vacuum that we're allowing to be created is to the benefit of the extremist groups that we need to be pushing back against.
Senator Graham, on that foreign policy, I want to take a pause here for a moment because this is not just happening, this is not just a story about Egypt and Syria. There's other things happening in the Middle East with Iran and Israel, and Leland Vittert is standing by in Jerusalem with a report from there. We'll be back to the senator in a moment after we hear from Leland today, because Leland, up until this point of the Libyan embassy and the Egyptian embassy having these mobs, one of the big stories, again, over the last 24 hours was what was happening between the White House and the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu. Tell us the latest.
Well, right now, that is continuing, this giant rift between the president and the prime minister. I want to show you the front pages of all three major Hebrew daily newspapers here in Israel. Essentially the same headline: Obama has no time for Prime Minister Netanyahu. The prime minister had requested a meeting with President Obama in the next couple of weeks to discuss the Iran nuclear issue, asking the president to set red lines where the United States would promise to attack Iran. Remember, the last meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama was not, shall we say, very friendly. It seemed somewhere between cold and rather icy as the Prime Minister lectured President Obama. That didn't go over so well, and the president said repeatedly he has a very different view than the Prime Minister does over Iran. And Prime Minister Netanyahu over the past couple of months has been ratcheting up the intensity on Iran, essentially saying, do something, America, or we are going to attack. Yesterday in a press briefing, he said the world is asking us to wait. Wait for what, I ask?
Those in the international community who refuse to put red lines before Iran don't have a moral right to place a red light before Israel.
And last night, there was a phone call between Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Obama, to try to smooth things over. Jenna, we don't know exactly what was said in that call or if people are now on more friendly terms. Back to you.
Leland, thank you very much. Back to Senator Graham now. So, Senator, we have these big international stories in the Middle East. Where do we stand? What do we do next?
Well, what we do is we change our policies toward Israel and make it very clear that we will work with Israel to develop red lines. Quite frankly, I share the Prime Minister's frustration. Sanctions are not working. They're hurting the Iranian economy, but they're not stopping the Iranian behavior of acquiring a nuclear weapon. They have two goals in Iran, the Ayatollahs. Number one, to get nuclear capability that will protect the regime, because they believe if they get a nuclear weapon, the West will leave them alone. And the second goal is to use that nuclear power to intimidate their neighbors and spread Persian Shia influence. It's clear to me they're never going to change their nuclear desires until they believe the survival of the regime's at stake, and sanctions and diplomacy is not working. We should have red lines communicated to Iran quickly, coordinated with Israel, and they must believe, the Iranians, that a massive U.S. military strike will come their way if they continue to acquire a nuclear weapon. The region is about to blow up. I was in Iraq. It breaks my heart to see Iraq fall apart. Syria is a contagion affecting the entire Mideast. This administration has no concept of the Arab Spring. They're disengaging on all fronts. The lack of leadership is about to lead to an explosion in the Mideast, and I hope people will start focusing on foreign policy, because it really does matter.
You said the region is about to blow up. What do you mean by that specifically?
The American disengagement, lack of leadership, leading from behind, is leading to uncertainty and doubt on all fronts. The Sunnis, the Shias, and the Kurds that were working together well after the surge success have now gone back into their corners. We've got a sort of a hands-off policy toward Iraq. There have been no progress in filling the ministries and having a hydrocarbon law. Every group, the Sunni, Shia, and Kurds, are just very disappointed with Americans' disengagement, are allowing Assad to murder his own people and have a detached view about how Syria is affecting the entire region, is emboldening Iran. How are the Iranians going to be ever convinced we're serious about their nuclear program when we sit on the sidelines in Syria? The French are calling for a no-fly zone. The Turks are calling for a no-fly zone. And again, Libya is an example of where leading from behind was not the right strategy. The small group who did this doesn't represent the Libyan people, but America has to lead. There is no substitute for leadership by the United States, and every group within the region is uncertain about who we are and what we believe, and Israel is paying the biggest price of all because our policies toward Iran are confusing, and you cannot allow Russia and China to be able to veto the effort by people in the region to be free. They're dictatorships themselves.
It is a big question for us today. What is American leadership, not only today, but what is it in general for this next generation as we continue to watch these events unfold? Senator Graham, nice to have you today as always. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We're getting some brand new